The Rangers are banking on internal bounce back for next year to make the playoffs. But who are the five players who could be leading those internal growths? We're talking about all that and more on this episode of Locked On Rangers. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Rangers, your daily Texas Rangers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are locked onto the World Series champion Texas Rangers. I'm Bryce Paddock, a cripplingly addicted Texas Rangers fan, covering this team for 11 seasons, including all 6 as the founder and host of this podcast. Thank you all so much for making Locked On Rangers your first listen every single day. If you're not already, you can follow me on Twitter at Bryce Paddock. You can follow the show at Locked On Rangers. Hit subscribe on your favorite podcasting platform and on YouTube, where the best way you can help grow the show is to comment nearly any single thing below. And before we get into the internal improvement candidates that are most likely to get better in 2025 than they were in 2024, this episode is brought to you by FanDuel. You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Now, in his post-season memoriam press conference, basically, Chris Young was talking about why the Rangers should be better next year, why things didn't work out this year. And a lot of his focus on how the Rangers are going to be better next year is that he said, I like the guys that we have here. Basically, that was the summation of the parts. It's just everyone was not as good as we thought they would be this year. But that translates to we think everyone will be, or at least enough people will be better next year than they were this year. That makes this year the aberration, the outlier, the not norm. So who are these players that are getting better? Well, I went and looked up 5 different guys who I feel very confident in saying they will be better in 2025 than they were in 2024. Not just a little bit better, but I think quite a bit better, at least in the case of 4 out of these 5 guys. Now let's start with the number one candidate to be better next year than they were this year. I think this one's pretty obvious. Wyatt Langford. This was Wyatt Langford's rookie season, and he put together an overall pretty successful campaign, finishing with 3.9 baseball reference WAR, an OPS plus that was 11% better than league average, 16 homers, 19 stolen bases, 74 RBIs. An okay first season. Not great, not world beating, not the Rangers' second best player behind Corey Seager, like I think was a little bit of the expectation coming out of camp, but still an overall very solid rookie campaign. Now, why did he struggle this year? Why is he going to be better next year? Well, a lot of the reason why he struggled this year was just the big leagues are hard. The big leagues are very hard, and it is very hard for young hitters specifically to come up to the big leagues and thrive right away. We've seen it in a lot of cases over the last, decade or so of these guys who just come up and are immediately amazing. Mike Trout is one of those guys who came up and basically his rookie year was one of the best players in baseball, and then it kept being that. Juan Soto came up as a teenager, has been one of the best hitters in baseball ever since. Bryce Harper came up as a teenager, has looked like one of the best hitters in baseball ever since. Heck, we even saw it with Evan Carter last year. Not so much this year, but last year we saw him come up, and he was an integral part of that lineup to help the Rangers not only make the playoffs, but take the Rangers through the playoffs to win their first ever World Series championship. But that just doesn't happen in baseball. It's not going to be the norm. It is going to be very much more of the exception than it even has been already. I mean, Wyatt Langford spent 200 plate appearances in the minor leagues after being drafted, and then this year made the team out of camp because, frankly, there wasn't really much more for him to learn at the minor leagues. But the jump for hitters specifically, not as much pitchers, but still a big jump from pitchers to go from the minor leagues at all to the big leagues. And for hitters, it's never been bigger. In the last 10, 15, heck, it has been a long time since it has been this big of a jump from facing the best pitching that the minor leagues has to offer to facing big league pitching. Now, there's a lot of reasons for this. There's a lot of gutting of the minor leagues, of there being fewer levels, of there being fewer players that are there, all kinds of different reasons. But that's kind of the case. And Langford took some time to get adjusted, get acclimated to the big leagues. This year, one of the biggest things that I was a little not worried about because he's a 22-year-old rookie. But I was disappointed, and I think he was disappointed himself, was you look at all these advanced stats, all these different charts overlaying different data and things about what was happening with Wyatt Langford, and it boils down to this. The reason why his offense was not that great for the first, I don't know, 5 months basically of his rookie season is that he wasn't punishing mistake pitches right down the middle of the plate, just curveballs, sliders, changeups, whatever that were just hung. Fastballs, middle to just try and get a strike over in a hitter's count or just to start the at bat. And Langford was not doing a great job of punishing those pitches. He did a lot of other things very, very well. He hit very, very well against left-handed pitching. He hit very, very well in clutch situations with runners in scoring position. He was one of the Rangers' best clutch hitters, which is evidenced by his several walk-offs this year from his multiple grand slams this year. But in terms of just mistake pitches, he was not great at punishing those. He also had a much higher expected stats against fastballs than his actual stats, meaning that a lot of the pitches he was hitting hard, but he was just hitting them right into the ground or was hitting them in would have been a home run in several other parks, but wasn't. He had 3 more expected home runs than actual home runs this year, meaning that he just got a little unlucky with where he was hitting those fly balls and in which ballparks. All of that leads me to believe that Wyatt Langford will be significantly better next year, having more of a game plan, having more of, an idea of how these big league pitchers are going to pitch to him, how to game plan against them. We saw him just get better and better about that throughout the season, and he was much, much better at punishing those mistake pitches in the end of the year when he was winning AL Player of the Month and Rookie of the Month in September. He was sensational. Now, do I think that he's going to put up those numbers for an entire season of having a 996 OPS for the entirety of 2025? Probably not. I'm not going to say it's impossible, but probably not. It's a little unfair to expect that. But the things that he was doing well when he wasn't punching mistake pitches is that he knew the strike zone incredibly well. It was called a little bit unfairly against him as a rookie. I mean, we've all seen the Angel Hernandez call. There were many others like it, not quite as egregious, but a lot of strikes that weren't strikes called against him. But he stuck to his plate discipline. He stuck to his game plan of knowing the strike zone and not swinging at bad pitches. But it could use to stand to swing a little bit more at the good pitches. He was also good at defending the plate. He was striking out below league average level. He was doing better at not striking out. He was working walks at a higher rate, even with a slightly unfair zone at times, which again happens and will still happen to him next year, even as a sophomore. But I think the defensive growth that he made throughout the season started off as a significantly subpar option out there in the outfield, and by the end was playing a decent amount of center field. I think next year he might end up being the Rangers' everyday center fielder, more than over Leody Taveras and over Evan Carter, even if Evan Carter is healthy. A little bit to preserve the back of Evan Carter, but a little bit because this guy's a speed demon, and he is getting so much better every single day defensively. We saw it, the routes that he was taking, the throws that he was making, the decisions that he was making out there in the outfield. They just kept getting better and better and better. And that's the thing I loved about this kid coming out of the draft. And the thing that I loved about the 200 minor league plate appearances that he had is that he would improve so much so quickly. There were some holes in his swing and some things that scouts weren't sure that he'd be able to do, about pitches that he could hit. He was swinging a little bit too much at sliders down and away out of the zone from right-handed hitters, and he shored up that hole in his swing. Then there were some other holes that might have been happening, and he just kept shoring those up and kept seeing those mistakes that he was making and quickly making adjustments to fix those. He just kept getting better at every level, kept adjusting, which is something that the best major league hitters do. They see holes in their swing and they figure out how to make adjustments, and then they make those adjustments and they do it. It took him a little bit of time to do that at the big league level because big leaguers, again, are very freaking good. But so is Wyatt Langford. This was overall an exceptional rookie season, and the Rangers probably banked a little bit too much on him being exceptional for just a player, not just a rookie. And I think that led to some problems that they could have addressed a little bit better in the offseason. Maybe they could have signed a DH or relied a little bit less on him and Evan Carter to, carry this offense and improve this offense while there was some regression from guys having career years like maybe Jonah Heim, like Adolis Garcia, not quite Nathaniel Lowe, but as there was even regression from Marcus Semien, a guy who seemed regression proof, a guy who'd been so consistent for the last 5 years. But I think it's very safe to bank on Wyatt Langford being better, not just a little bit better, but significantly better next year. Is that going to be enough for the Rangers to make the playoffs after missing out by a pretty hefty margin this year? I'm not sure. But if they get some help from these other guys, that might just be enough. Coming up, we're going to look at the other 4 guys on this roster. I think you can be pretty comfortable about being much, much better next year than they were this year. Right after this word from our sponsors. This show is brought to you by Ibotta. It's fall, which means it is officially tailgating season. It's time to stock up on all your grilling favorites and earn cash back on every purchase when you use Ibotta. So you don't have to choose between burgers and hot dogs. You can get both. Ibotta is a free app that lets you earn cash back every time you shop. Earn on hundreds of items from groceries to beauty supplies, even toys. So you can make sure you're beating inflation no matter what you're purchasing. The average Ibotta user earns $256 per year. That could cover the cost of an entire shopping trip, that flight you've been eyeing, or the fancy dinner you've been craving. You can now save on over 2,400 brands and shop at over 1,000 retailers, including your favorite grocery stores, Lowe's, Macy's, Sephora, Best Buy, and more. It's time you join the over 50 million users who use Ibotta to earn cash every single time they shop. Right now, Ibotta is offering our listeners $5 just for trying the Ibotta app using code LOCKEDONMLB when you register. Just go to the App Store or Google Play Store, download the free Ibotta app, and start earning cash back and use code LOCKEDONMLB. That's IBOTTA in the Google Play or App Store when you use code LOCKEDONMLB. Now, the next player I think the Rangers can definitely bank on internal growth from having a better season next year than he did this past year, that is Josh Jung. I have been a Josh Jung believer since I was watching him at Texas Tech as a freshman. This kid is a legitimately very, very good hitter. And I think with the season he had this year, with the injuries and specifically that one wrist injury, that one stupid fastball from Phil Maton, clearly the pitch that impacted this season the most was that Phil Maton fastball to the wrist of Josh Jung. It broke his wrist. He missed 80-something games before he came back and then just still wasn't quite himself. And those first 4 games, I know it was a 4-game sample size, but the first 4 games where he had a couple of home runs, he also, I believe, had a double. He was just looking on fire at the plate. And then one fastball to the wrist later, and it just completely derailed this season. Only 46 games this year, only 7 home runs, a 719 OPS, still ended up with a .7 WAR season while playing basically a third of the games this season. That was on pace for a 2.1 WAR season. Excuse me, 0.6 WAR in 46 games. So if he played a full season, that's about 2 win player. That's still about an average starting regular first division, third baseman. And again, this is another season he has missed with injuries. I think a lot of the injuries have been fluky things, whether it's getting hit in the wrist by a fastball. Anybody's wrist is going to break. It's just a fact. Getting hit in the thumb with the 115 mile an hour line drive that derailed the season last year. Again, anybody gets hit in the thumb with a 115 mile an hour line drive, your thumb's probably going to break. It's not a matter of, oh, this guy is so brittle. How could he, withstand the rigors of a season? Those are just 2 freak things that happened that cost him a total of 150-ish games, almost 160 games over the last couple of years. This guy, when he was healthy, when he was, on that star pace, when he was, an all-star, he was an all-star in his first season in the big leagues. 88 games in the first half of 2023, where he had 19 home runs at the break and an .835 OPS. He was the starting all-star third baseman in the American League. There were plenty of other amazing third basemen in the American League. Jose Ramirez and Alex Bregman, also a very good third baseman. And of course, the Boston third baseman, I was about to say Sedan Rafael. No, Rafael Devers, who was also in the American League. did not start the All-Star game because Josh Jung was better than all of them in that first half of the rookie season. Now, he fell off quite a bit in that second half after coming back from the thumb injury. He wasn't quite the same hitter. Had some moments for sure in the playoffs. I don't think the Rangers win the World Series without him. Had some moments in the ALCS, that one multi-homer game where he by himself tried to carry this offense across the finish line. I mean, he had an OPS north of 1,200 in both the wild card round and the ALDS. This guy is a very, very important part of the Rangers lineup. I think that he could stand to use some improvement on his swing decisions. I mean, the thing that he did not do well his rookie season was walk. He was in the bottom 20% of walk rate, the bottom 20% of strikeout rate, getting those numbers closer to league average. I think he's always going to strike out quite a bit. I don't think walks are going to be a huge, huge part of his game. But I think that getting those numbers closer to league average would make him one of the most dangerous hitters in this league. This is an incredibly good hitter. And I think that it gets slept on and he gets called injury prone and he just gets forgotten about. This is an incredibly good hitter. The Rangers finally, he was the first Rangers first round pick, it felt like in forever, that was really not only living up to a potential, but exceeding it. He was a huge part of why this team was so darn good in 2023. And I think he will be a part of the reason why this team is so darn good in 2025. Next guy who I think is going to have a much better season next year, or even if he doesn't, I think it will still be a huge boost to this Rangers team. A guy who was very slept on offensively. That's Nathaniel Lowe. Nathaniel Lowe, people will look at this season and say, wow, what a disappointment. He only had 16 home runs. He only, he wasn't, hitting the ball over the fence. He only had a 762 OPS. But I think that doesn't really get the whole point of Nathaniel Lowe. Nathaniel Lowe is the Rangers' fifth best hitter by WAR in terms of position players. He's a very, very good defensive first baseman. He's a very good offensive first baseman. And this year, he was 20% better than league average with the bat, with a 120 OPS plus. 120. There were not a whole lot of other Ranger hitters that were that much better than league average. There's Corey Seager. That was it. By OPS plus, Nathaniel Lowe was the Rangers' second best hitter this season. The on base was in the 360s. The slug was still over 400. Yeah, he only had 16 home runs, but he also missed 20 games early on in this season. This is the first time that he has ever dealt with an injury in his professional career. People forget about that, how he was out for the first month and a half of the season because of that oblique issue, something that can be a very lingering, nagging issue for hitters in general. And Lowe in the second half was significantly better with those power numbers. I mean, the power numbers were really, really weak early on. He did end up playing 9 games at the end of April, only 1 home run in those 9 games, only 1 home run in the month of May, and only 2 home runs in June. But when the calendar flipped to July, I mean, he really turned that power right back on. An 878 OPS in the month of July, a 931 OPS in the month of September, with 5 home runs in July and also 5 home runs in September. He finally found that power stroke, and all the while still working quality at bats, still hitting better against left-handers this year than he did against righties. Something that he had reverse splits in 2022 when he won that Silver Slugger. He was not as good against lefties last year. This year kind of got back to being a guy who hits lefties well, hits righties well, and is an incredibly reliable, dependable bat in this Rangers lineup. I don't think he's going to be the Rangers' second best hitter next year beside Corey Seager. I think that is probably going to be Langford. But in terms of who's going to be the Rangers' third best hitter, I think it's going to be Lowe. I think Lowe should be hitting higher up in this order. If he takes Adolis Garcia's spot as the Rangers' cleanup man next year, I would not be shocked. I think that might actually be the right move. It might have been the right move this year because he just puts together quality at bats. He sees pitches well. He could be doing a little bit more damage. I think he will next year. I think that oblique injury lingered a little bit longer. And the lack of power this year, the lack of extra base hits, I don't think it showed up as much in the lack of home runs because in 2023, he had 17 home runs. This year, 16 home runs. But it was a lack of doubles. He had 38 doubles last year and just 16 this year. That's not a whole lot. I think this guy could be doing a whole lot more damage. He's got, in terms of raw power on this team, I honestly think that Lowe is at the top of the scale in terms of just when he gets into one, the most damage he can do. I think it's right there between him and Adolis Garcia. I think Langford is kind of close. I think Seager, his game power plays up from his raw power because he is so good at getting the most out of every single pitch. I think Simeon is the same exact way. But in terms of just the raw pop, I think that Nathaniel Lowe tops the charts. And people who will watch batting practice consistently will tell you that he hits the balls the farthest because he's got that dog in him. He's got that raw pop in him. And I think that we slept on how good of an overall season Nathaniel Lowe had this year because the offense in general from the whole team was so far down and so suppressed. But I think that Lowe is such an important part of this team. I think a lot of, consternation will be had over, how much he's going to make in arbitration next year. I think he's going to be worth the number that he hits because in terms of hitters that I expect to be, 20, maybe 30% better than league average with the bat next year, I feel confident about Seager. I feel pretty confident about Langford. But of the rest of these hitters, I think Nathaniel Lowe is probably the safest bet to have a better season next year than he did last year. We've got a couple more youngsters, some really, really interesting batters and hitter, one batter and one hitter who I think might just make or break how the Rangers bounce back in 2025. Right after this word from our sponsors. This show is brought to you by FanDuel. FanDuel is the best place to get in the action on sport. It's the number one sports book in America. Hey, NFL fans, you can get started with a big return on FanDuel, America's number one sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of a game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. They've also got World Series odds for all the teams that are out there right now. The Dodgers, the favorites at plus 110 after winning a very boring game one of the NLCS. Then the Yankees at plus 175, Gardos at plus 550, Mets all the way down there at plus 650 after losing just one game. Go check out all the action. They've also got different odds for football, for basketball, for hockey, whatever you're wanting. Go to FanDuel.com and download America's number one sportsbook. Now, the number 4 player who I think could be significantly better in 2025 than they were this year is Evan Carter. Now, the main reason for Evan Carter's struggles this year were just injuries, and really just the one injury, the back injury that kept lingering and lingering and lingering. He had a surgery to remove he had a procedure to remove an ablation on his back that was hampering some of the progress of him coming back. He has started a hitting program and he is feeling pretty confident. He talked about it a month ago before the procedure happened. That they figured out what was wrong with his back, what was causing all these issues, and that he felt pretty confident that it wouldn't be an issue moving forward and that he can just be healthy. And if he has other injuries, then he has other injuries. But the back not being a lingering problem would be just so important to the Rangers, not only next year, but moving forward. Evan Carter is going to be a huge part of this Rangers future in terms of, long-term hitter prognostication of who's got the highest upside of guys in this system. I mean, Evan Carter's way up there. The only guy ahead of him, I think, is Wyatt Langford. I mean, Josh Jung is an important part of this young core. I think that eventually we'll see Sebastian Walcott play a big part in this next wave of hitters. He's still quite a ways away. Spent about a week or two in Double-A, so I'm not saying that he is necessarily right around the corner. So in terms of young guys that are going to hold down the fort, Evan Carter is a huge, huge part of this Rangers team bouncing back. I mean, he had an incredible run to and through the postseason in 2023. Absolutely incredible. Sensational. Again, I said it at the time, and I said it all offseason, don't bank on Evan Carter having a 3.46 line, batting average of 306 in the regular season, on base 413, slug 645, a 1,058 OPS in those 20 or so games in the regular season in September. It was great. It was amazing. A little savior. Help the Rangers win the World Series. But that's not who the Rangers are banking on him being. It's not who they were banking on him being this year. They were banking on him being significantly better than he was. This year was rough, incredibly rough. 45 games for him this year in the big leagues, a 633 OPS, hit below 200, on base below 300, and slugged below 400. Did end up with 5 home runs, 2 triples, and 6 doubles in those 45 games. A little bit better slugging than I thought that he would have. The walk rate was fine. The knowledge of the strike zone was still very much there. I mean, a 9.3% walk rate, a little bit better than league average. The chase rate, again, elite. One of the best knowers of the strike zone. Him and Wyatt Langford both having that elite innate ability to know what is a strike and what isn't, is a very, very valuable prospect, or a thing to have as a prospect, as a young big leaguer. He is still incredibly fast. I still feel very good about him being at least an average defensive center fielder. But I think the Rangers might end up putting him in left field and Wyatt in center field, just for the wear and tear of Evan being a guy who has already sustained those 2 back injuries. If that's not a thing, then I think that maybe if the Rangers say, okay, you're just healthy now, your back is not going to be an issue moving forward, then I think they probably will end up giving the edge to Carter to go out there and play every day in center field. I think that Leote has kind of played his way out of being an everyday regular. Even though I think he got a little bit too much hate this year, he still wasn't good. And Evan Carter and Wyatt Langford are better options as everyday center fielders / left fielders / wherever else they're going to play in this lineup. But I don't think that Evan Carter is going to come back and have 1,000 OPS next year. But him having an OPS in the 750 to 850 range, having a high on base, being a good defender out there in left field, being a menace on the base pass, having a little bit more pop than you think a guy of that wiriness should have. I think that's something the Rangers can and will bank on next year. Would I feel better about it if Evan Carter had come back and looked more like the 2023 version of Evan Carter we saw at the end of the year in 2024? That would have been nice. I would have liked that. I would have felt more confident moving forward. But I think this kid is too talented. He is too good to just think, oh, yeah, that's it. We got, 50 games of Evan Carter being incredible at the big league level, and that's all we're going to get. I don't think that's true. This is an incredibly hardworking kid. This is an incredibly, talented kid. He's shown a lot of upside through the minor leagues, basically from the second the Rangers, ended up basically stealing him in the draft, in that 2020 draft, the 2nd round pick with the high 1st round talent. I mean, this is a guy who is going to be a big part of the Rangers' future, and his health is going to determine a lot of that. Also, if he can hit lefties, we still don't really know that about Evan Carter. But I feel very good in saying this is going to be a guy who's significantly better in 2025. I think is going to be a big part of this team, and not just better than a bad 2024, but I think an actually good to borderline all-star caliber player in 2025. The last guy on this list, the number 5 guy who I think will be better in 2025 than in 2024, or at least at the big league level, that's right, it's Kumar Rocker. I think the Rangers might end up making a similar mistake with expecting so much from Rocker next year, but I think a lot of it is going to come down to the health of Rocker. Not only his health, but how much the Rangers are going to trust him, how much they're going to ask of him next year. We saw how great he can be at his best this year, coming back from Tommy John surgery, looking absolutely unhittable in AA and in AAA, unhittable in his first game at the big league level, and then a little bit more hittable in his 2nd and 3rd games this season at the big league level. Still flashes of brilliance from him. That curveball, rock ball, whatever you want to call it, is already one of the best pitchers in baseball. I think he's going to have to use a lot more of that repertoire next year when he is hopefully going deeper into games. And I think a lot of his success is the talent level is clearly there. The question about the health and the question of how much the Rangers are going to ask of him next year. He pitched a little bit below 50 innings this year, combined from the minor leagues and major leagues, coming off of Tommy John surgery. And next year, maybe they ask 100 or so innings of him in the regular season. Maybe 150 is the max. But if the Rangers are contending next year, they're going to have to be really careful with Rocker, because they're going to want him healthy for the postseason. this is a guy where, as the rotation stands right now, I feel pretty confident in saying that he is going to be their second best starter, and they're going to ask them to be. And he would start game 2 of a playoff series, whether it's a wild card round or an ALDS or whatever. I guess those are literally the only 2 options in the playoffs to start your playoff season. But the Rangers are going to have to be careful with him coming off of this surgery. How much of a workload can he handle? How much are they going to ask him to handle? Is he going to be, healthy and fully ready and, at the peak of his powers when the Rangers are going down that stretch and trying to contend? Because the Mariners are going to be right back in there next year. The Astros, they might lose Bregman this offseason, but I don't think they're going away by any means. Still a very, very good team that were much, much better than the Rangers this year. And if the Rangers are going to be better next year, they're going to need a lot from Rocker. They're going to have to ask a lot from Rocker. And I think he's up to the challenge. It's just a matter of, can they keep him healthy? Can they manage his workload in a way that is, not only beneficial for him for the long term, but also for the whole term of this season? Of how many starts can they get from him? How many innings do they ask from him when he is starting? Is he going to be on a pitch count for some of his starts? I don't know exactly what that's going to look like, but what I do know it's going to look like is Kumar Rocker being on the mound for, really hoping, more than 3 starts and 11 or so innings next year at the big league level. And when he is on that mound, this guy is absolutely as electric and tantalizing of a pitching prospect as we have maybe ever seen from the Texas Rangers. And that's why I think he is going to be one of the 5 players that is significantly better next year than they were this past year. Now, is all of this enough? Is all of this enough to get the Rangers back into the playoffs? I think if these guys are, about as good as I'm hoping, if Josh Jung bounces back and has an amazing season, if Nathaniel Lowe gets back to more of Silver Slugger Nathaniel Lowe than we've seen, if Young is healthy, if Wyatt Langford is an all-star, absolute superstar player, I think that could be enough. I think Evan Carter being healthy and looking like a borderline all-star or all-star player, I think that could be enough. And I think Kumar Rocker is going to be significantly better next year and better than a lot of the Rangers starting pitchers from this year. I'm hoping that the Rangers can get some of these guys who I didn't name to have better seasons next year. But I mean, you're noticing some pretty key names that I left out who had really bad years. Adolis Garcia, and Marcus Semien, and Jonah Heim. I don't know if those guys are going to be better next year. I'm hoping, or at least they'll be a little bit better next year, if not, all-star, caliber seasons. I mean, Semien had a disappointing year and was still an all-star and a 4-win player. But still, the Rangers are going to need a lot of bounce back from a lot of different guys, especially if they're not going to be aggressive in free agency. If they're maybe going to sign a couple of relievers and maybe a starting pitcher, they're going to need a lot of bounce back from this offense. I don't think they're going to go out and sign Juan Soto. So the offensive improvement is going to have to come from within. It's going to have to come from a lot of these guys, and the ones that I did and didn't mention, and hopefully Corey Seager being incredible yet again. But that's going to do it for today's show. Thank you all so much for listening and subscribing. And until next time, don't forget to enjoy World Series champion Texas Rangers baseball.